Let's be brutally honest, the idea that money will save you is the most dangerous lie you've ever been told. It's a fantasy sold to keep you chasing a prize that will ultimately leave you hollow. The story you're about to witness doesn't just challenge that lie, it detonates it completely. It is irrefutable proof of a terrifying and liberating truth. The only way to discover unimaginable wealth is to first become completely bankrupt and alone. This isn't just a fairy tale, it's a raw, unfiltered look at how hitting rock bottom can be the only way to find a foundation worth building a life on. Meet Roger Knight. As a billionaire's son, his life was a golden playground of endless luxury and zero consequences. But when a sudden twist of fate leaves him broke and abandoned, he's forced into a world he never knew existed. He had to work a real, back-breaking job, a humbling experience that strips him of his pride and forces him to confront the empty man in the mirror. And that's where he meets Peyton Patterson, a struggling single mother who works tirelessly just to keep her and her son afloat. For her, every day is a battle, but she fights it with a quiet dignity and a fierce kindness that Roger has never seen before. The stage is set for a collision of two worlds, the fallen prince and the resilient queen of a humble kingdom. He sees her as a simple woman living a life of quiet desperation. She sees him as just another pair of hands, unimpressed by the ghost of his past fortune. But a struggling single mother showed him how to love. That is the heart of our story. How did this woman, with nothing to her name, teach a man who once had everything the only lesson that ever mattered? How did her kindness break through a lifetime of arrogance and solitude? This is a story about redemption, about the heart-aching power of human connection, and about a love that blossoms in the harshest of soils. It's a reminder that the best parts of life are never for sale. Before we dive in, let us know where in the world you're watching from today. We want to imagine the beautiful scenery with you as we share this journey. And if you believe in the power of love and redemption, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss stories like this, and share it with someone whose heart you think will be touched by what they're about to see. The silence in his tiny, barren apartment was louder than any screaming match had ever had with his father. Just weeks ago, Roger Knight, the infamous billionaire's son, had a world that moved at his command, a universe that bent to the weight of his name. Now that universe had collapsed into a black hole of debt and shame. He was officially bankrupt, a word that felt foreign and venomous on his tongue. It wasn't just the money that had vanished, it was the people, the so-called friends, leaving him utterly and profoundly alone. This new reality forced him into a fluorescent-lit warehouse, a place that smelled of cardboard and quiet desperation. The work was grueling, a humbling litany of lifting, stacking, and sweating that left his formerly manicured hands raw and aching. Every box he lifted felt like a monument to his failure, a physical manifestation of how far he had fallen. He, Roger Knight, was now just another face in a sea of blue collars, a ghost haunting the aisles of a life he never imagined. This soul-crushing job was his only lifeline, a constant reminder of being humiliated. And then there was her, his supervisor, the woman who held the clipboard and the power to dictate his miserable days. He learned her name was Peyton Patterson, and from the tired lines around her eyes and the fierce set of her jaw, he could tell life hadn't been a walk in the park for her either. He expected a power trip, a petty tyrant eager to lord her small authority over the fallen prince. That was the only language he understood, after all constant jostling for power and dominance that defined his previous world. It was during a brief coffee break that he overheard her phone call, her voice soft but strained, promising someone named Leo a bedtime story. He saw a faded crayon-drawn picture taped to her worn-out locker. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. She was a single mother, and the weight of her world suddenly seemed infinitely heavier than his own. This wasn't just a job for her, it was survival. This was a woman who was truly struggling, not for status, but for everything that mattered. He watched her from a distance, this woman who managed a crew of rough-edged workers with a quiet, unyielding grace. There was a resilience in her posture that both annoyed and intrigued him. Peyton Patterson wasn't just his boss, she was a mirror reflecting the kind of strength he'd never known. A strength forged in real-world fires, not in the gilded cage he'd escaped. This accidental discovery was a minor plot twist in his tragic play, adding another layer of complexity to his reluctant journey toward redemption. As the end-of-shift bell blared, its sound grating on his nerves, Roger felt a strange, unsettling feeling. He looked at Peyton, who was patiently explaining a procedure to a new hire, a flicker of kindness in her otherwise exhausted expression. This wasn't the simple story of a rich man losing his fortune. It was something more, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of a real, complicated, and utterly unforeseen love story. He couldn't shake the feeling that his destiny was now inexplicably tied to this struggling woman, a thought that terrified him more than being bankrupt. In the beginning, Roger saw Peyton's world through a distorted lens of privilege and cynicism. He watched her meticulously count her tips from a side gig, a small smile playing on her lips, and felt a pang of something he mistook for pity. To him, this wasn't living, it was merely existing, a grim cycle of work and worry. The former billionaire's son couldn't comprehend finding satisfaction in such a struggling existence. He saw her simple joys not as treasures, but as coping mechanisms for a life devoid of real ambition or power. Her consistent kindness was the most baffling part of the puzzle. She'd offer a word of encouragement to a coworker or share half of her meager sandwich, and Roger would inwardly scoff. In his world, kindness was a currency used for manipulation, a tool to disarm an opponent before the final blow. He viewed her compassion as a glaring weakness, a naive flaw in a world that chewed up and spit out the gentle. He was a man who had been taught that strength was found in ruthlessness, not in empathy. He'd catch himself observing her, trying to find the cracks in her facade. Surely, this quiet dignity was an act, a mask to hide a deep-seated bitterness, but the mask never slipped. Whether she was dealing with a rude customer or a malfunctioning piece of equipment, Peyton Patterson remained steadfast. This unwavering grace was an affront to his own worldview, which had been shattered and left him feeling humiliated and adrift. Her resilience only highlighted how fragile his own sense of self had been, built on a foundation of money, not character. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He was the one who was truly alone, even when surrounded by the supposed glamour of his past life, while this single mother had built a world rich with purpose, even if it was financially poor. His pride, the last remnant of his old identity, was a shield he held up desperately. It whispered poison in his ear, telling him he was better than this, that her life was a cautionary tale, not an example. It was a defense mechanism against the terrifying truth that he was the weak one. He saw her life as a dead end, a bleak portrait of sacrifice with no reward. What was the point of all this overcoming if the prize was just another day of the same struggle? He couldn't see the love, the connection, the quiet triumphs that she cherished. His vision was clouded by the ghost of his billions, making him blind to the real treasures in front of him. This was a critical phase in his difficult path to redemption, though he fought at every step of the way, clinging to his arrogance. And so, he kept his distance, a silent observer wrapped in a cloak of judgment. He saw a struggling woman and her simple life, and he dismissed it. He failed to understand that her brand of strength wasn't about dominating others, but about refusing to let the world break her spirit. He was about to learn, however, that her perceived weakness was a force more powerful than any fortune, a force that would soon turn his entire world on its head with a surprising plot twist. Peyton Patterson had heard the whispers. Of course, it was impossible to miss the gossip that the new warehouse guy was the disgraced scion of the Night Empire. But unlike the others who either stared with pity or sneered with schadenfreude, Peyton was thoroughly unimpressed. She had seen, too, much of life's real hardships to be dazzled by a fall from a golden pedestal. A billionaire's son and his sob story meant little to her. What mattered was whether he could do the job and pull his weight. She observed Roger Knight with a practiced, neutral eye. She saw the flash of arrogance in his posture, the way he'd flinch when given a menial task as if it were physically painful. He was a man clearly humiliated by his circumstances, but he masked it with a layer of defiant pride. Peyton didn't coddle him or mock him. She simply gave him his tasks and expected them to be done. Her quiet patience, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil he was so obviously battling within himself. Her world had no room for egos. Her dignity was her armor. When he'd make a sarcastic comment or question a procedure with a condescending tone, she wouldn't rise to the bait. Instead, she would meet his gaze with a calm, steady look and explain the logic with unshakable professionalism. This response was more disarming than any angry retort could have been. It challenged his arrogance not with a direct confrontation, but with a quiet strength that suggested his gains were childish and ineffective here. She was a single mother struggling to build a future, and she didn't have time for his drama. Peyton judged him on a simple, universal metric: his work ethic. In the beginning, it was abysmal. He was clumsy, distracted, and his pride often got in the way of asking for help. She corrected his mistakes patiently, demonstrating the proper technique without a hint of condescension. She wasn't trying to save him or fix him, she was simply doing her job as a supervisor. This straightforward approach was something Roger had never encountered before. It was a world of merit, not of name, a reality that was both terrifying and strangely pure. She saw a man who was profoundly alone, stripped of everything he thought defined him. But beneath the layers of bitterness, she occasionally caught a glimpse of something else: a flicker of intelligence, a hint of a desire to prove himself. It was buried deep, but it was there. Her kindness wasn't pity, it was the baseline respect she afforded everyone, a belief that anyone could find their footing if given a chance. Her quiet dignity was the start of a slow, heart-aching process of overcoming for him. She was laying the groundwork for a profound transformation, though neither of them knew it yet. By refusing to acknowledge the ghost of his past fortune, she was forcing him to confront the man he was in the present. Her simple, unwavering expectation that he just do his job was the first real challenge he had ever faced. She wasn't just his supervisor, she was becoming an unwitting catalyst for his redemption, pushing him toward a destiny he never could have imagined. It was bound to happen. Roger's pride, that stubborn, self-destructive remnant of his former life, finally led him to disaster. Convinced he knew a faster way to operate the forklift, he ignored Peyton's clear instructions, dismissing her expertise with a wave of his hand. The resulting crash was a symphony of destruction, a tower of expensive inventory tumbling down, a costly mistake that echoed through the cavernous warehouse. In that moment, the weight of being bankrupt felt heavier than ever, because he knew he couldn't afford to lose this job. As the furious shouting of the general manager descended upon them, Roger braced for the inevitable. He was ready to be fired, to be publicly humiliated once more. He opened his mouth to confess, to take what was coming to him, but Peyton stepped in front of him. With a calm that defied the chaos, she looked the manager in the eye and said, "It was my fault. I authorized the new stacking procedure. I take full responsibility." The words hung in the air, a shocking, unbelievable shield between him and the consequences of his arrogance. Roger was left utterly speechless, stunned into silence. Why would she do that? She was a struggling single mother who couldn't afford a mark on her record, let alone the potential loss of her own job. Taking the blame for him was a selfless act of professional suicide. It made no sense in his transactional world, where every action was calculated for personal gain. This wasn't just kindness, it was something far more profound, something that shattered his cynical understanding of human nature. He watched as she endured the manager's tirade, her face a mask of quiet composure. She never once glanced back at him, never once betrayed the truth with her eyes. She took the heat, absorbed the blame, and protected him. For the first time, Roger felt a pang of something other than self-pity. It was a deep, unsettling wave of shame mixed with a bewildering sense of gratitude. This woman, who he had secretly looked down upon, had just shown more character than anyone in his old life ever had. This was the ultimate plot twist, a moment so unexpected it completely recalibrated his perspective. He, the great Roger Knight, the former billionaire's son, had just been saved by the quiet dignity of a woman he had dismissed as weak. The experience was more humbling than losing his fortune, more profound than any business lesson his father had ever tried to teach him. It was a raw, emotional moment that stripped away the last vestiges of his pride and left him feeling completely exposed. He was still confused, still trying to process her motives as he left the warehouse that evening. The selfless act replayed in his mind, a scene that didn't fit into any narrative he knew. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated grace, and it left him feeling more alone with his own flawed character than ever before. He realized he knew nothing about this woman, nothing about the world she lived in, and for the first time, he genuinely wanted to understand the source of her incredible strength. A few days later, a scheduling mix-up forced Roger to drop off some paperwork at Peyton's apartment after their shift. He knocked hesitantly, the sound echoing in the modest hallway of the building. The door swung open not to Peyton, but to a small boy with her same bright, intelligent eyes. "Are you Mommy's friend from work?" the child asked, his voice filled with an innocent curiosity that was utterly disarming. In that instant, Roger wasn't a bankrupt heir or a warehouse worker, he was just a man standing on a doorstep. Peyton appeared. Behind her son, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "Leo, what have I told you about opening the door for strangers?" she said gently, before inviting Roger inside. The apartment was small, humble, but it radiated a warmth that his sprawling, empty childhood mansion never had. It was filled with the clutter of a life lived with lover crayon drawings on the fridge, a well-oiled teddy bear on the sofa. It was the antithesis of the cold, sterile environment he had grown up in. He watched, captivated, as Peyton knelt down to speak with her son. Their interaction was a beautiful, effortless dance of affection and respect. She listened intently as Leo recounted his day, her laughter filling the small space. There was a connection between them, a palpable bond of unconditional love that felt completely alien to Roger. His own upbringing had been a series of transactional arrangements, his worth measured in achievements and his relationship with his father defined by business and expectation, not warmth. This was a heart-aching scene that struck a deep, resonant chord within him. He saw a form of wealth he never knew existed, a richness of spirit and love that no amount of money could buy. For this struggling single mother, her son was not a legacy or an heir to an empire, he was her entire world, the source of her incredible strength. Roger felt a profound sense of emptiness, a realization that in all his years as a billionaire's son, he had never experienced a moment of such pure, uncomplicated love. He had always felt so utterly alone, even in a crowd. Now he understood why. He had been surrounded by assets and alliances, not family. The warmth in Peyton's home highlighted the chilling cold of his own past, making him see his lost fortune not as a tragedy, but as the shedding of a meaningless skin. The real poverty, he was beginning to realize, had been in his soul all along. This was a quiet, powerful step on his journey of overcoming his own damaged past. As he left her apartment that evening, the image of Peyton and her son was seared into his mind. It was a revelation, a quiet surprise that recontextualized everything he thought he knew about value and happiness. He was starting to see that Peyton's kindness wasn't a weakness at all. It was the foundation of her world, the source of a power he was desperate to understand. Her selfless act at the warehouse wasn't an anomaly, it was simply who she was, and his destiny felt more entangled with hers than ever. The warehouse was quiet during the late shift, the usual daytime clamor replaced by the low hum of fluorescent lights. It was in this strange liminal space that the walls around Roger finally began to crumble. He and Peyton worked in a comfortable silence for a while, a new, unspoken respect hanging between them since the incident. It was she who broke the silence, asking a simple, unassuming question. "You seem a million miles away tonight." "Everything okay?" The genuine concern in her voice was his undoing. "I don't think I've ever been okay," he admitted, the words spilling out before he could stop them. He spoke of his old life, not with the arrogance he once had, but with a hollow, emotional emptiness. He described lavish parties filled with hundreds of people, yet he confessed that in all those years, he never had a single person he could call a true friend. Every relationship had been a transaction, every smile a negotiation. His billions had built him a cage, not a community. He told her about his profound loneliness, a feeling that had been his constant companion his entire life. Being bankrupt and humiliated had been painful, but the most shocking part was how little the social fallout had actually changed his internal reality. He was alone then, and he was alone now. The only difference was that now he no longer had the distractions of wealth to pretend otherwise. He was facing the stark, unvarnished truth of his own isolation for the very first time. Peyton listened without judgment, her expression a mixture of empathy and understanding. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just listened, giving him the rare gift of her full attention. As a single mother, she knew a thing or two about feeling isolated, about carrying a heavy burden by oneself. Her quiet presence was a balm to his wounded spirit, a silent acknowledgement that she saw the man, not the fallen billionaire's son. It was an act of kindness that felt more valuable than any fortune. This confession was a pivotal moment in his redemption. By admitting his deepest vulnerability to her, he was letting go of the pride that had defined and imprisoned him for so long. He was trusting her with his broken pieces, and in her quiet acceptance, he found a flicker of human connection that he had been starved for. It was the beginning of a real friendship, the foundation of a love story he didn't even realize was being written. As the shift ended and they walked out into the cool night air, the atmosphere between them had changed. It was charged with a new intimacy, a shared vulnerability. For the first time, Roger didn't feel completely alone. He had shared his truth with someone who didn't want anything from him, who saw him for who he was in that moment. It was a fragile, terrifying, and exhilarating feeling, a hint that perhaps his destiny wasn't to reclaim his old life, but to build an entirely new one. The crisis arrived suddenly, as they often do for those already struggling. A frantic phone call revealed that Peyton's son, Leo, had a medical issue that required an expensive treatment not fully covered by her meager insurance. The cost was a staggering figure that might as well have been $1 million. Roger saw the color drain from her face, her usual composure cracking to reveal a raw, terrifying panic. For a moment, she looked completely lost, a single mother facing an insurmountable wall. His first instinct, a ghost of his past self, was to lament his own bankrupt status. The old Roger Knight could have solved this problem with a single phone call, a careless wave of his financial wand. He felt a familiar sting of being humiliated by his own powerlessness. But then, a different instinct took over, one forged in the fires of his recent humbling. He wasn't the billionaire's son anymore, but he still had the mind that had been trained to navigate complex systems. "Let me see the bills," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Let me see the insurance policy." Peyton, desperate, handed over the stack of confusing paperwork. For the next few hours, Roger wasn't a warehouse worker, he was a shark back in his element. He pored over the fine print, his mind dissecting legal jargon and identifying loopholes with a speed and precision that left Peyton in awe. He saw a path, a clever strategy that didn't require a single dollar of his own non-existent money. He spent the next day on the phone, not as a fallen heir, but as a determined advocate. He wasn't charming or threatening, he was relentlessly logical. He quoted obscure clauses back to insurance agents, negotiated payment plans with the hospital's billing department, and found a charitable grant they had overlooked. By the end of the day, he had cleverly dismantled the mountain of debt into a series of manageable hills. He hadn't just thrown money at the problem, he had solved it with pure intellect and tenacity. It was a turning point. He had proven his worth in a way that had nothing to do with his family's name or fortune. This act of service, this application of his dormant skills, was a profound moment of redemption. He had used the tools of his old, corrupt world to create a genuinely good outcome. The look of overwhelming relief and gratitude on Peyton's face was a reward greater than any deal he had ever closed. It was a deeply emotional and heart-aching victory. That night, something shifted irrevocably between them. She didn't just see him as a co-worker or a friend anymore. She saw a brilliant, capable man who had fought for her and her son. And he, in turn, realized that his value as a person was not tied to his bank account. He was overcoming his past by using it to build a better future. The foundation of their budding love story was now cemented not just in shared vulnerability, but in mutual respect and admiration. The past has a nasty habit of showing up uninvited. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the warehouse, a stark contrast to the beat-up vehicles in the employee lot. Out stepped Veronica, his ex-fiancée, dressed in designer clothes that cost more than Peyton's yearly salary. She surveyed the scene with a look of undisguised disgust, her eyes landing on Roger in his dusty work clothes. "My God, Roger," she said, her voice dripping with pity and contempt. "Is this what you've become?" The visit was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to maximize his shame. Veronica had been a part of the transactional world had left behind, their engagement more of a merger than a romance. She mocked his job, his clothes, and the very air he was breathing, her words like tiny, sharp daggers. Roger felt the old, familiar sting of being humiliated, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. He was the fallen billionaire's son, and she was there to dance on the grave of his former life. Before Roger could even muster a response, Peyton, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "He's become a hard-working man," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with a fierce integrity. Which is more than can be said for some people who have never worked a real day in their lives. There was no anger in her tone, only a powerful, unshakable dignity. She stood between him and Veronica, a formidable, unexpected shield. She was defending him, not his name or his money, but him. Veronica was taken aback, momentarily speechless at being challenged by a nobody. She scoffed, gave Peyton a dismissive up-and-down look, and turned back to Roger. "You're keeping interesting company," she sneered, before getting back in her car and speeding away. The encounter was brief, but its impact was seismic. Roger looked at Peyton, who simply adjusted her work gloves and said, "Break time's over. Let's get back to it." She hadn't done it for show, she had done it because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, Roger saw Peyton as more than just a friend or a potential love interest. He saw her as a protector. She had stood up for him when he felt most alone and vulnerable, facing down a demon from his past with a courage he himself was struggling to find. Her kindness wasn't passive, it was a blade, sharp and true, used to defend the people she cared about. It was an incredibly powerful, emotional revelation for him. He realized that strength wasn't about having power over others, but about having the integrity to stand up for them. Peyton, the struggling single mother, was one of the strongest people he had ever met. This event solidified his shift in perspective, accelerating his journey of overcoming his past and embracing his new reality. He was falling in love with her, not just for her compassion, but for her fierce, unyielding spirit. This was no longer just a love story, it was an alliance. After the incident with Veronica, a new chapter began. Peyton seemed to make it her quiet mission to show Roger that his new life wasn't a punishment, but a different kind of existence with its own rewards. She invited him over for dinner, not to a fancy restaurant, but to her small apartment. The meal was simple spaghetti and meatballs, but it was cooked with a care and love that made it taste better than any Michelin-star dish had ever had. It was a truly heart-aching gesture of acceptance. She showed him the joy of simple things. They took her son, Leo, for a walk in the park on a sunny afternoon. Roger, who had only ever seen parks from the tinted windows of a limousine, found himself laughing as he pushed Leo on the swings. He watched Peyton's face light up with pure, unadulterated joy, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that was entirely new. He was discovering a world where happiness wasn't an expensive commodity to be purchased, but a feeling to be experienced. This was a profound education for the former billionaire's son. His previous life had been a frantic pursuit of more money, more status, more things. It had been a hollow, noisy existence. Now, in the quiet simplicity of a life he once would have scorned, he was finding a sense of peace he never knew was possible. Being bankrupt had stripped him of his possessions, but it had also liberated him from the burden of constantly wanting what he didn't have. He started to see the world through her eyes. He learned to appreciate the taste of a good cup of coffee, the beauty of a sunset, the sound of a child's laughter. These were the real treasures, the things his billions could never buy. He was happier now, struggling alongside Peyton, than he ever was when he was living a life of effortless luxury. The irony was not lost on him. He had to lose everything to find the things that truly mattered. This journey was the heart of his redemption. It wasn't about regaining his fortune, it was about redefining what it meant to be wealthy. Peyton was his guide, showing him that a life rich in love, connection, and simple joys was the most valuable of all. Their growing love story wasn't built on grand gestures or expensive gifts, but on shared moments of quiet happiness, a testament to their deep and emotional connection. He no longer felt alone or humiliated by his circumstances. He felt grounded, present, and surprisingly, profoundly happy. He was overcoming the emptiness of his past, one simple, beautiful moment at a time. He wouldn't have traded a walk in the park with Peyton and Leo for all the money in the world. He was finally starting to understand that his true destiny was not to be a rich man, but to be a good one. As Roger's contentment grew, so did his desire to contribute in a way that felt uniquely his. He had spent weeks observing the inner workings of the warehouse, and the business analyst inside him, long dormant, began to awaken. He saw inefficiencies everywhere in the chaotic inventory system, the outdated shipping logistics, and the underutilized floor space. It was a puzzle begging to be solved, a challenge that sparked a familiar fire within him. He wanted to help, not for glory, but for Peyton and their co-workers. Working late into the nights in his small apartment, he began to sketch out a plan. He used his old knowledge of supply chain management and process optimization, skills he once used to make his father's massive corporation even richer. Now he was applying that same high-level thinking to this small, struggling business. He did it all in secret, pouring his energy into creating a comprehensive overhaul plan that could be implemented with minimal cost. It was his quiet way of giving back. He anonymously submitted the detailed proposal to the company's owner, presenting it as an idea from a concerned employee. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity and effectiveness. It outlined a new inventory tagging system, a rerouting of forklift traffic to reduce bottlenecks, and a strategy to renegotiate contracts with shipping providers. It was a masterclass in business efficiency, something the small company could never have afforded to buy from a consultant. The owner, a gruff but fair man, was stunned by its thoroughness. The changes were implemented almost immediately, and the results were dramatic. Within a month, productivity had skyrocketed, errors had plummeted, and profits saw a significant increase. The entire atmosphere in the warehouse shifted. The owner, ecstatic, gave everyone a raise and a bonusa life-changing amount for people like Peyton. She was overjoyed, celebrating the extra money that would ease the burden for her, and Leo. She had no idea that the architect of her relief was the man standing right beside her. Roger felt a deep, quiet satisfaction that was purer than any business victory from his past. This wasn't about ego or making a name for himself. It was about making a tangible difference in the lives of people he had come to care about. It was a selfless act of kindness, a way of using the privileges of his past to serve his present. This secret success was a massive step in his redemption, proving to himself that his skills could be a force for good. He kept his secret, content to watch the positive ripple effects of his work. His actions had created a small miracle, a surprising plot twist for the company that was now thriving. He looked at Peyton, her face free from financial worry for the first time in a long time, and knew he had made the right choice. Their love story was deepening, enriched by unspoken acts of loyalty and care, pulling them closer to a shared destiny. The call came on a Tuesday morning from a number Roger hadn't seen in months. His heart hammered against his ribs as he answered. The voice on the other end was unmistakably imperious, powerful, and belonging to his father, Arthur Knight. Roger expected a lecture, another tirade about how he had humiliated the family name. Instead, the words he heard sent a shockwave through his entire being. A plot twist so immense, it threatened to shatter the new world he had so carefully built. "The test is over, Roger," Arthur said, his voice devoid of its usual disappointment. "You passed." He went on to explain the unbelievable truth, the bankruptcy, the frozen accounts, the repossession of all his assets. It had all been a meticulously orchestrated charade. A test. His father, fearing his son was becoming a worthless, entitled shell of a man, had stripped him of everything to see if he could survive, to see if he could build a life of value without the safety net of wealth. Roger was speechless, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, rage, relief, confusion roaring in his head. His entire struggle, the pain, the shame, the journey of overcoming it had all been a game. A cruel, calculated experiment designed by the man who had always treated him more like an investment than a son. He had been a pawn in his father's grand lesson plan about character and hard work. The revelation was a profound, disorienting surprise. His father explained that all of it would be returned to him: money, the properties, the status of billionaire's son. He had proven he had substance, that he wasn't just a spoiled heir. Arthur was proud. But the praise felt hollow, the promise of his restored fortune like a poisoned chalice. He thought of Peyton, of the simple, genuine happiness he had found while being struggling and alone. He had found a life of meaning here, a life his father could never have manufactured. This wasn't the triumphant moment of redemption he might have once dreamed of. It was a crisis. Returning to his old life felt like a betrayal of the man he had become. He looked around his small apartment, a place that had once been his prison, but was now his sanctuary, and felt a deep, gut-wrenching fear. The test had worked, but not in the way his father had intended. It hadn't taught him to be a better rich man. It had taught him that he didn't want to be a rich man at all. As he hung up the phone, the world tilted on its axis. He was no longer bankrupt. He was once again one of the wealthiest men in the country. But this incredible news felt like a death sentence for the authentic life he had discovered. He now faced a terrible choice, and a single terrifying question echoed in his mind. What would he tell Peyton? How could he explain that the foundation of their connection might have been built on a lie? The weight of his father's revelation settled on Roger like a physical shroud. Every laugh he shared with Peyton, every quiet moment, was now tainted by his monumental secret. He was terrified of losing her, the one person who had seen him at his lowest and shown him nothing but genuine kindness. How could he tell her that? The bankrupt man she had come to know and care for was in fact a billionaire's son playing a part in his father's twisted play? He chose silence, a decision born of fear and a desperate desire to preserve the beautiful reality they had built. Together, he convinced himself it was to protect her, that the truth would only complicate things and hurt her. But deep down, he knew he was acting out of pure selfish terror. He feared she would see their entire connection as his struggle, his vulnerability, his journey of overcoming. He imagined the look of betrayal in her eyes, and the thought was unbearable. His days became a masterclass in deception. He went to work at the warehouse pretending to be the same struggling man he had been just days before. He listened to his coworkers complain about bills, nodding in solidarity, all while knowing he had a fortune waiting for him. The duplicity was eating him alive, creating a chasm between him and Peyton that she couldn't see but he could feel widening with every passing hour. He was more alone with his secret than he had ever been with his poverty. The joy he had found in his simple life began to curdle into anxiety. A walk in the park was no longer a simple pleasure, it was a scene in a play where he was the lead actor, deceiving his audience of one. Their love story, which had felt so pure and heart-aching, now felt like a fragile piece of glass, and he was holding a hammer. He was so afraid of the truth shattering everything that he held it back, not realizing that the pressure of the secret itself was creating cracks. He was caught in an impossible trap. Reclaiming his old life meant losing Peyton and staying in his new one meant living a lie. His father's test had been about character, and now he was failing this new, more important test of his own making. The path to redemption had taken a sharp, dark turn. He was no longer the man being humiliated by circumstance, but a man actively deceiving the woman he loved. It was a betrayal not just of her, but of the better man she had helped him become. He kept telling himself he would find the right moment to confess, a perfect time that, of course, never came. Every day of silence made the lie bigger, the potential fallout more catastrophic. He was heading for a disaster, a collision of two worlds that was destined to be emotional and devastating. He was so focused on the fear of a potential betrayal that he failed to see he was already committing one, setting the stage for a plot twist born not of fate, but of his own cowardice. The truth, as it often does, came out not through a planned confession, but through a cruel twist of fate. Peyton, tasked with clearing out an old storage locker at the warehouse, stumbled upon a box of discarded newspapers. On the front page of a business journal from a year ago was a picture of a smiling, tuxedo-clad Roger Knight, standing next to his father, Arthur Knight. The headline read, "Knight Industries, the billionaire father-son duo." The world stopped. The air left her lungs. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. The name, his intelligence, his strange familiarity with a world of wealth he claimed to have lost. It all made a sick kind of sense now. But the article wasn't about him being bankrupt. It was about his success. A quick search on her phone revealed the whole story, including recent news of Arthur Knight's powerful return from a sabbatical. There was no mention of a bankruptcy. There was only wealth, power, and a life a million miles away from hers. She felt a profound and devastating sense of betrayal. The man she had defended, the man she had opened her home and her heart to, the man whose vulnerability she had cherished, had it all been a lie. She felt like a fool, a pawn in some cruel game played by a bored billionaire's son. Her kindness, her support, her defense of him against his exfiancy, she replayed it all in her mind. And every memory was now poisoned, twisted into a scene of her own humiliation, when she confronted Him holding the newspaper like a weapon, the look on his face was all the confirmation she needed. The shame, the panic, it was the face of a man caught in a lie. She didn't let him explain. The hurt was too raw, too overwhelming. Was any of it real? She asked, her voice trembling with a quiet, emotional fury. Or was I just a fun part of your poverty experience? A little charity project, the struggling single mother, to make you feel better about yourself. For Peyton, this wasn't just a lie, it was a mockery of her entire life. She had fought for every scrap of dignity, worked herself to the bone for her son, and she had let this man into that world, believing he understood her struggle. To find out he was a tourist in her reality, a rich man playing a game, was the deepest insult imaginable. The foundation of their love story crumbled into dust, leaving her feeling exposed and utterly alone. She told him to leave, that she didn't want to see him again. The trust, once so absolute, was completely shattered. She couldn't see the real fear and love in his eyes. All she could see was the deception. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding, it was a betrayal that cut to the very core of her identity. The man she thought was on a path to redemption was, in her eyes, just another rich man who believed the world and her heart were his to play with. Peyton's words echoed in Roger's mind, each one a shard of glass in his heart. Was I just a fun part of your poverty experience? Her accusation struck him with the force of a physical blow, because it contained a kernel of the truth he had feared. His father's test had, in fact, turned her life into a part of his curriculum. He was left standing in the ruins of the trust he had destroyed, finally understanding the catastrophic consequences of his silence. He had never felt so completely and utterly alone. He was now faced with the ultimate choice, the true final exam of his father's test. On one side was everything he had been raised to value: his fortune, his status as a billionaire's son, a life of limitless power and comfort. His father was waiting, ready to welcome him back into the fold. It was the easy path, a simple return to the man he used to be. Reclaiming his fortune would be as simple as making a phone call, leaving this world of heartache and hard labor behind forever. On the other side was Peyton. Winning back her trust seemed like an impossible task, a journey far more arduous than overcoming bankruptcy ever was. It would require a level of humility and honesty he wasn't sure he possessed. It meant facing the man he had been and the man he had pretended to be. It meant proving that his love for her, the most real and heart-aching emotion he had ever felt, wasn't part of the lie. It was a path with no guarantee of success. The thought of walking away, of returning to his old life, filled him with a cold, hollow dread. He imagined his gilded cage, the empty parties, the transactional relationships. He realized with stunning clarity that he couldn't go back, not because he was a changed man, but because his heart was no longer his own. It belonged to a struggling single mother and her son, the two people who had shown him the meaning of home. Her love was the only thing he couldn't bear to lose. He finally understood what real wealth was. It wasn't in a bank account, it was in the fierce integrity of a woman who would defend you, the warmth of a home-cooked meal, the sound of a child's laughter. Losing his money had been a shock. Being humiliated had been painful. But the thought of losing Peyton, that was an agony that eclipsed everything else. It was the only bankruptcy that truly terrified him. His redemption was meaningless without her. His choice became clear. This wasn't about money versus love, it was about choosing which life was real. The life his father offered was a comfortable illusion. The life he had to fight for with Peyton was messy, difficult, and uncertain, but it was the only one that mattered. His destiny was not to reclaim his inheritance. It was to earn back the trust of the woman he loved, no matter the cost. He knew what he had to do. Roger knew that a quiet apology to Peyton wouldn't be enough. The lie had been born from the world of power and influence his father represented, and it needed to be publicly dismantled in that same world. He arranged to meet his father, not in a private office, But at a press conference, Arthur Knight had called to announce the successful return of his son to the family empire. The room was filled with reporters, the very people who had once chronicled his every move as a billionaire's son. Arthur beamed as Roger took the podium, expecting a speech about lessons learned and a triumphant return. But Roger didn't look at the cameras. He looked straight at his father, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Father, for the lesson," he began. "You wanted to teach me the value of hard work and character. You succeeded, but not in the way you intended. You taught me that your world, this world of wealth and power, is utterly meaningless." A shocked silence fell over the room. He then spoke of his time being bankrupt, of the job that had humiliated him, but it also saved him. And then he spoke of Peyton. He didn't use her last name, protecting her privacy, but he described her with a reverence and love that was palpable. He told the stunned audience about a struggling single mother whose kindness, integrity, and strength outshone any fortune. "You stripped me of my money," he said to his father, "but you showed me what it means to be truly wealthy. So no, Roger," declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "I will not be returning to Knight Industries. I am publicly rejecting your offer." He then delivered the final decisive blow to his old life. "I found something while I was alone and had nothing. I found a real family. A woman and her son who are my entire world. They are everything I need." He was choosing them, not as an act of rebellion, but as a declaration of where he belonged. It was the ultimate act of his redemption. It was a shocking, emotional moment, a plot twist no one in that room could have predicted. He was publicly disowning his inheritance, choosing love over billions. He wasn't just turning his back on the money, he was turning his back on the entire value system he had been raised in. He was choosing the difficult, uncertain path of winning back Peyton's trust over the easy, empty path of wealth. It was a grand gesture meant not for the world, but for an audience of one who he hoped was listening. He walked off the stage, leaving his stunned father and a chaotic room of reporters behind. He felt no regret, only a terrifying, liberating sense of clarity. He had burned the final bridge to his past. He was no longer the billionaire's son. He was just Roger, a man in love, on his way to beg for forgiveness from the woman who had become his true destiny. He had made his choice, and now he had to face the consequences. Peyton saw it all. A coworker had shown her the live stream of the press conference on her phone. She watched, heart pounding, as Roger publicly rejected the life he was born into, all for her. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, heard the tremor of pure, unvarnished emotion in his voice. His grand public gesture wasn't about winning back his fortune, it was a desperate, heartfelt plea for her forgiveness. It was the most heart-aching and brave thing she had ever witnessed. The betrayal she felt was suddenly eclipsed by a wave of overwhelming love. But the final plot twist was yet to come, and it came from the most unexpected source. Arthur Knight, who had been publicly humiliated by his own son, did not react with the fury everyone expected. Instead, he had watched with a look of stunned revelation. For the first time, he saw not the heir to his empire, but a man of true character, a man he had desperately hoped his test would create. His son's transformation was real, profound, and far more successful than he had ever imagined. Later that day, a car, the same sleek black model that had once brought Veronica to the warehouse, pulled up outside Peyton's apartment. This time, Arthur Knight stepped out. He didn't come with anger or demands. He came with an offer that was both a business proposition and an apology. He explained to a shocked Peyton that he had been wrong. His test had been cruel, but it had led his son to her, and for that, he was inexplicably grateful. He saw now that she was the key to Roger's redemption. He told Peyton that he was not just restoring Roger's inheritance. In a move that defied all corporate logic, he was creating a new executive partnership at Knight Industries, and he was offering one of the positions to her. He wasn't just giving her a job, he was giving her power. "My son has finally learned the difference between price and value," Arthur said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. And he was right. Your integrity, your kindness, and your love are the greatest treasures he has ever found. It was a breathtaking surprise, an act of overcoming from a man who had seemed incapable of change. Arthur Knight recognized that Peyton's strength was exactly what his family and his company needed. He wasn't just accepting her into his family, he was declaring that she was its most valuable asset. The struggling single mother was being named a partner in a multi-billion-dollar empire, not out of charity, but out of respect for her character. When Roger arrived at her door, ready to spend the rest of his life earning back her trust, he found his father's car outside, and his world turned upside down once more. He saw Peyton, her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of joy and disbelief. Their love story had not only survived the ultimate test, but it had also transformed everyone it touched. Their destiny was not to live a simple life, nor a life of empty wealth, but to build a new future together, founded on the very values she had taught him. And so, the story of Roger and Peyton comes to a beautiful close. What an incredible journey we've been on together. We saw a man who was bankrupt in soul become the richest man in the world, not through money, but through love. We witnessed a struggling single mother whose quiet kindness and fierce integrity proved to be more powerful than any corporate empire. Their heart-aching love story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments are often the soil from which our greatest strengths grow, and that true redemption is found not in reclaiming what we've lost, but in discovering what truly matters. Their journey of overcoming was filled with so many twists and turns, ultimately proving that destiny has a strange and beautiful way of bringing us exactly where we need to be. Now we want to bring you into the conversation. This story was an emotional roller coaster, and would love to hear your thoughts on it. What was the one moment in this story that impacted you the most? Was it when Peyton took the blame for Roger's mistake, or his public rejection of his father's fortune? And what about that ending? Did you expect Roger's father to have that change of heart, or were you hoping for a different outcome? Let us know in the comments below if you loved the way their story concluded. If this journey touched your heart, please give this video a like to help us share it with others who need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we have so many more powerful stories waiting for you in our archives, and many new ones on the way that you won't want to miss. Thank you for being here with us today.